I studied the brain in love. I and my colleagues, Dr. Lucy Brown, Dr. Art Aaron, and Dr. Bianca Acevedo, have now put over 100 people who were madly in love into a brain scanner to study the brain circuitry of romantic love and deep feelings of attachment. 17 of these people were happily in love, 15 had just been rejected in love, and 17 were in love long term. Then in 2005, Match.com, the dating site, came to me and asked me, why do you fall in love with one person rather than another? I know there's all kinds of cultural reasons that you fall in love with one person rather than another, but I wanted to know if there were biological reasons too. You know, people will say, well, we had chemistry, or we didn't have chemistry. And I wanted to know if basic body physiology pulls you naturally towards some people rather than others. So I created a questionnaire to measure some traits linked with biology. I put that questionnaire on the dating site chemistry.com, the sister site of Match.com, nationally in America, and also in 40 other countries. It's now been taken by 13 million people. And so this morning, I want to give you the short story of the research, The Brain in Love, and what it tells us about happiness. Around the world, people love. They sing for love. They dance for love. They compose poems and stories and ballets and operas and movies and plays about love. They retell myths and legends about love. We have love charms, love potions, and love magic. People pine for love. They live for love. They kill for love. And they die for love. It's one of the most powerful brain systems that mankind has evolved for great happiness and for great sorrow. This morning I'm going to stick to the happiness part. I think that we've evolved three different brain systems, actually, for mating and reproduction. One is the sex drive, the craving for sexual gratification, linked with the testosterone system in both men and women. The second is romantic love, passionate love, obsessive love, being in love, infatuation, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to maintain that it's linked with the dopamine and norepinephrine system going up and the serotonin system going down in the brain. The third brain system that I think evolved from mating and reproduction was attachment, that sense of calm and security that you can feel for a long-term partner, linked by other scientists with the brain systems for oxytocin and vasopressin. I think all three of them evolved. I think they evolved for different reasons. I think the sex drive evolved to get you out there looking for a whole range of partners. You can have sex with somebody you're not in love with. I think romantic love evolved to enable you to focus your mating energy on just one individual at a time. And I think that attachment, that third brain system, evolved to enable you to tolerate this person or stick with this person at least long enough to raise a child together as a team. There's a number of interactions between these systems. It's a fascinating story. I don't have time to tell you more about it. I will stick simply to romantic love and what happens in the brain. The first thing that happens in the brain when you fall in love is a person takes on what I call special meaning. As one man said, he said, the world had a new center, and that center was Marianne. George Bernard Shaw said it a little differently. He said, love consists of overestimating the differences between one woman and another. Then you focus on this person. Everything about them becomes special. Their car is different from every other car in the parking lot, the street they live on, the music that they like, the speeches that they're, every single thing about them becomes special. In fact, before I put them in the brain scanner, I would ask them, what do you not like about him or her? And they could list what they did not like about their partner, and then they just swept that aside and focused on what they do. As a matter of fact, when you're madly in love, parts of the brain for decision-making actually begin to shut down. Intense energy, you can walk all night and talk till dawn. A man from the South Pacific once said, I felt like jumping in the sky. Euphoria when things are going well, horrible mood swings into despair when you don't hear from the person or something goes wrong. Real bodily reactions, awkwardness, stammering, butterflies in the stomach, a pounding heart. What a pain. You know, the moment you want to be your most impressive, you can barely get a word out. Emotional dependence. As one man said to me, he said, anything she liked, I liked. Separation anxiety, you really do not like to be apart. Real frustration attraction. If the person doesn't call, if they don't write, or if they break up with you, this brain system for romantic love becomes more intense. And indeed, I would say that this is the source. It's called mate guarding by scientists. The drive to be possessive of this person, not only sexually but emotionally. It probably causes all of our enormous number of worldwide crimes of passion. But the three main characteristics of a romantic love are craving for emotional union. Sure, you'd like to go to bed with them, but bottom line is you want them to call, you want them to write, you want them to ask you out, you want them to say, I love you. You are obsessively think about the person. You can't stop thinking about them. You go to bed at night thinking about them. You wake up in the morning thinking about them. There's somebody camping in your head. And last but not least, you're highly motivated to win them. What people will do when they are in love is absolutely astonishing. And last but not least, it's involuntary. I think Stendhal said it best when he said, love is like a fever. It comes and goes quite independently of the will. And indeed it does. So I launched an experiment with my brain scanning partners, Art Aaron, Lucy Brown in the middle, and myself, with some graduate students. And we began putting people into the scanner. I forgot to tell you something. My hypothesis was, you'll see everything in red. Everything in red are traits that are linked with the dopamine system in the brain. Everything in light blue, bodily reactions, is probably linked with the norepinephrine system. Sexual desire is certainly linked with the testosterone system. Mate guarding is probably linked with the vasopressin system. And the dark blue, the obsessive thinking, is linked with low activity in the serotonin system. So my hypothesis was, if I looked in the brain, I would at least be able to find, hopefully, activity in circuits in the dopamine system linked with all of these characteristics in red. So we began to put people in the scanner, and our first study was, the New Yorker got wind of our thing. You can't get two people in a scanner, but nevertheless, that was their idea of it. We put 17 people into the machine, our first experiment, 10 women and 7 men. And this is what we found. We found activity in a tiny little factory near the base of the brain called the ventral tegmental area. And it's a brain region, the A10 cells, it's a brain region that makes dopamine and sends this natural stimulant to many parts of the brain. And in fact, it's part of the brain's reward system. The brain region that creates, the dopamine system creates energy, attention, focus, motivation, and craving. We found no gender difference. Men are just as romantic as women. If I had more time, I'd tell you, in fact, I think that men are a little bit more romantic than women are. I've got a lot of good data on that. And I think that women are just as sexual as men. I think we're going to come to understand sometime that women are just as sexual and men are just as romantic. But anyway, after I saw this data, and here's one of our scans of the ventral tegmental area, working over time as this person in the brain scanner is looking at the person they're madly in love with. And it suddenly occurred to me that romantic love is not an emotion. I had always thought it was an emotion, or at least a whole series of emotions from high to low. And in fact, you have all those emotions when you're madly in love. And you have all kinds of cognitive thinking processes too. But it basically comes from primitive regions in the brain linked with drive, with wanting, with craving. As a matter of fact, I read a lot of world poetry because I think world poetry is a wonderful artifact of what's going on in the brain. And I think of all the statements that have ever been talked about that have described romantic love, it was best summed up by Plato in the Symposium, in which he said, "The God of love lives in a state of need. It is a need. It is an urge. It is a want. It is a homeostatic imbalance. It is a human drive. It is a human drive to win life's greatest prize, which is a mating partner." But can it last? Everybody in the world thinks it can't last, and we thought it couldn't last either. And we began to hear about more and more people in their 50s and 60s who said they were still madly in love with their long-term partner. So we began to say we were going to put some people into the machine who reported that they were in love long term. Not loving, but in love long term. So we got 17 men and women in their 50s and 60s. Average age was 53. Average number of years married was 50. They all maintained they were madly in love, and we began putting them into the brain scanner, doing exactly the same experiment as we did with those who had just fallen happily in love. And sure enough, Bianca Acevedo on your left is the lead author on that article. And sure enough, among those who were in love long term, we found the same activity in that brain region linked with intense romantic love, the ventral tegmental area. We also found activity in a brain region linked with deep attachment. Attachment grows as you get more and more familiar with somebody. The difference was in our people who were newly in love, there was activity in a brain region linked with anxiety. You know, when you're just falling in love, you are anxious. You know, you think, oh, what did I say that for? Am I too fat? How come I did that? Or what did he say there? You're anxious. And in fact, among those who were in love long term, they were no longer anxious. Instead, we found new activity in brain regions linked with calm and pain suppression. Why him? Why her? Why do you fall in love with one person rather than another? Well, there's all kinds of cultural reasons that you fall in love with one person rather than another. Timing is important. I've gotten older, so I would add lighting. Lighting's important too. Proximity is important. We tend to fall in love with somebody from the same socioeconomic and ethnic background. We tend to fall in love with somebody who is similar degree of intelligence, education, good looks, same religious and social values, same reproductive and social and economic goals, and certainly your childhood plays an enormous role. But you know, you can walk into a room and everybody's from your background. Everybody is the same level of intelligence and good looks, and you don't fall in love with all of them. So what is it that pulls you naturally towards one person rather than another? So I began to look through the biological literature at any brain system that was linked with any personality trait. And sure enough, the brain's full of brain systems, but most of them keep the heart beating and the eyes blinking. They're not linked with personality traits. But there's 4 brain systems that are linked with personality traits. Each one of these systems, dopamine, serotonin, testosterone, and estrogen and oxytocin, they actually go together, each one of them is linked with a constellation of personality traits. So I decided what I would do is create a questionnaire to measure the degree to which you express the traits linked with each one of these brain systems. Put that questionnaire on this dating site, and then watch who was naturally drawn to whom. And this is what I found. Basically, you know, there's patterns to nature, there's patterns to personality, and there's patterns to mate choice. And here's what I found. Oh, yes, because I was working with a dating site, I had to name these people. We're all a combination of all of these brain systems. They're not cubby holes, they're not types. They're brain systems, and we're all express all of them. But the bottom line is we express some more than others. As a matter of fact, I just studied 100,000 people. As I said, 13 million people have taken this questionnaire. About 30,000 take it every week. I'm going to go through the 4 very broad styles of thinking and behaving, and then go through why you fall in love with one person rather than another, why you choose certain kinds of people, why you're naturally drawn to certain kinds of people, and then what this has to do with happiness. So people who are very expressive of the dopamine system in the brain tend to be novelty-seeking and risk-taking. It's called sensation-seeking in the academic world. They're curious. They have the most interests. They make the most money. They also lose the most money. They tend to be very energetic, restless, exploring, and not just jumping off cliffs or scuba diving. They can be sitting in a room reading 10 hours a day and still be very much of an explorer. They're optimistic and enthusiastic. They probably are happier, independent, self-reliant, impulsive, unreflective. There's a downside to all of these types. I generally show a lot of slides of the ups and the downs, but we'll stick with the ups. One of the downs is that they are unreflective. They look out, not in. As a matter of fact, I was recently making a speech to a group of therapists in California, and I'm very much of this type. And I said, well, you know, I'm not really interested in who I am. And somebody from the back of the room shouted, you want to talk about it? I didn't really. They tend to be mentally flexible and open-minded, and they're very creative. They've got a tactical intelligence, too. They can leap in at just the right moment. A good example would be Richard Branson. A lot of our entrepreneurs around the world, as he said, I've always thought rules were made to be broken. Indeed, he's broken a lot of them and, of course, made himself a lot of money. Another example is Lang Lang, a very different interests, a very different style, a very different background, but the same basic temperament. And he's described with flair, dazzling, charisma, bravado, extremes, ebullient, a guy who's very high on the dopamine system in the brain. This kind of person is drawn to people like themselves. I've got data on 30,000 people. If you are a creative, energetic, curious person, you tend to be drawn to people like yourself. The serotonin type, those expressive of serotonin, tend to observe social norms. There's actually a gene in the serotonin system that is linked with observing social norms. And in fact, that particular gene is most prevalent in China and Japan. I'm beginning to do sort of genetic maps of the world. They like the familiar. They're cautious. They're not scared, but they're cautious, calm, controlled. They like plans, routines, and schedules. They tend to be orderly, persistent, literal, very good with numbers. They've got more close friends, and belonging is very important to them. They respect authority and follow the rules, and they're loyal. It's very interesting. One of my questions, it's 56 questions on my questionnaire, and I can't remember quite what the question is, but it's something like, would you rather have loyal friends or interesting friends? Now, we all want loyal friends, and we all want interesting friends, but this type cannot tolerate unloyal friends. And the other three types cannot tolerate uninteresting friends. It's mathematical, real divide of this particular style of thinking. A good example is Meg Whitman. She's was the head of eBay, which I think you've got in Australia. I'm really hooked on biography now and watching how people use words. It was interesting when Ed Diener was saying that happy people use more happy words. That not only that, but actually I did a whole study on the lexical hypothesis that we use words that actually characterize who we are. And in the first 25 pages of her autobiography, the word values came up over 50 times. The right thing, being frugal, these are all traits linked with the serotonin system in the brain. Hu Jintao, the former president of China, very much of the high serotonin type. These types also go for people like themselves. Traditional, cautious, frugal, follows the rules, respects authority, more religious, tend to go for people like themselves. The other two go for their opposites. High testosterone goes for high estrogen, and high estrogen goes for high testosterone. If you are expressive of the testosterone system, you tend to be analytical, logical. It's called understanding rule-based systems, anything from engineering to math to computers to mechanics to music. Music's very structural. For them, for me, I just swing to the beat, but they can see the structure to music. They're inventive. Rank-oriented. As a matter of fact, if you inject testosterone into a lizard or a bird or even a monkey, they'll begin to fight for rank. They're very rank-oriented. Emotionally contained. I had a girlfriend recently who said, who had a husband who was very high testosterone. And she said to him, she said, sweetie, you haven't told me that you loved me in a month. And he said, well, I said that last month and nothing's changed. So they're emotionally contained, decisive, and direct. These are the kind that say, get to the point. A good example is Steve Jobs. You can see, actually, the testosterone in his face. The very high, the very strong above the orbits, the very strong jaw, the high cheekbones, the high forehead is all built by testosterone. A good example of a woman who I think is very high testosterone is Hillary Clinton. You know, you can be high testosterone and high estrogen, low on both or high on one on the other. The ratios are dramatic. As I said, I've never met two people who are alike. I've studied 100,000 people. No two people took that questionnaire the same way, but there were patterns. And she's very high testosterone. I liked it when asked why she was attracted to Bill. She said he wasn't afraid of me, so a high testosterone woman. The last of the four is the high estrogen. They see the big picture. It's actually the way estrogen programs the brain in the womb. Imaginative, mentally flexible, very good people skills, social skills, linguistic skills, intuitive. We actually know some of the brain circuitry of how intuition works, climbing into somebody else's head. They're empathetic and nurturing. An interesting thing is trust. Anthropologists have never really understood how trust could have evolved, because if you trust the wrong person, you're really up the creek. But if you trust the right person, as it turns out, you save a lot of metabolic energy. And you can see now why these traits would go together, because these people are able to read enough into somebody else to know who to trust. You can see how whole constellations of personality traits would evolve together. They are the ones that are interested in who they are, and they seek harmony. They're not any nicer than anybody else. They won't hit you in the face, though. They'll stab you in the back. More emotionally expressive and have a diplomatic intelligence. Oprah Winfrey is a good example. As she said, you know, the only time I made a bad decision is when I didn't follow my instinct. Well, I want to tell you, Steve Jobs would think that was out of her mind. He doesn't go for intuitive. He would go for the absolutely analytical. Bill Clinton, I think, is a man who's very expressive of the estrogen system. You know, the whole world knows he can't stop talking. He's real people skills. In America, we have a joke about the fact that he feels everybody's pain. He's the one that cried at the daughter's wedding, not his wife. And in fact, you know, Americans are always wondering when we're going to have our first president. I think we've had our first president, and his name's Bill Clinton. Our first female president, and I think his name is Bill Clinton. Charles Darwin, of course, was a great combination of the high dopamine system, I think, and also the high estrogen system. Enormously daring man, and also a creative man, and of course synthesized all living things into large patterns, as the estrogen system is so good at doing. So, I think we inherited the brain circuitry for love, and I think we are beginning to find some of the patterns linked with why you fall in love with one person rather than another. But what makes a happy relationship, and how can we keep love alive? We've stumbled on happiness, actually. This started with one of our colleagues, Mona Zhu, who went to China to redo our first experiment of people who were young and happily in love. So she put 18 people into the brain scanner and studied their brains. What was interesting about it was that 40 months later, she went back to see who was still in love and who was no longer in love. And what she found among those people who were still madly in love with their partner 3.5 years is activity in a part of the medial orbital frontal cortex, the blue up there. It's a brain region that is linked with two words: positive illusions. Literally, the ability to suspend negative judgment, forget what you don't like about them, over-evaluate them, and just focus on what you do. The ability to just think positively about the situation around you. We have now stumbled on one of the brain regions that appears to be central to the feelings of being happily in love. We also went back to our long-term lovers, people in their 50s and 60s. We give a lot of questionnaires before you before we put them in the machine. And one of them was on marital satisfaction. How satisfied are you with your marriage? And indeed, they all seem to be in love with their partner, but those who scored much higher on this scale for marital satisfaction also showed much more activity in the mirror neurons. The mirror neurons are the brain region linked with empathy. They had more empathy, more compassion for their partner than others did. They also showed more activity in several brain regions linked with controlling stress, controlling your emotions, and controlling your sadness and depression. So in fact, we're beginning to find the brain regions that are associated with happiness in a long-term relationship. So what can you learn from all this? Well, if you want to sustain a happy partnership, there's a few things that we know from the brain that you can do. First of all, positive illusions. Forget about the socks they dropped on the bed next to every single morning for the last 30 years, and think about how hilarious he is at entertaining at a dinner party, or how he reads poetry to you at night. Focus on the positive. Do novel things together. Novelty drives up the dopamine system in the brain and can sustain feelings of intense romantic love. Also, stay in touch. Any kind of touching drives up the oxytocin system and can give you feelings of deep attachment. Holding hands, walking arm in arm. Put your foot on his foot while you're having dinner together under the table. Learn to, at least to start the night, sleeping in his or her arms. It's going to drive up the oxytocin system and give you feelings of attachment. Same with regular kissing. Drives up oxytocin and give you feelings of attachment. Regular sex is a very important thing. Any kind of sexual activity drives up the testosterone system, so you want more sex. It also, any stimulation of the genitals drives up the dopamine system and can push you over the threshold into falling in love. And also with orgasm, there's a flood of oxytocin giving you those feelings of attachment. So having sex with somebody who you love drives up all three of the basic brain systems: sex drive, romantic love, and deep feelings of attachment. And last but not least, it's a new article. It's quite interesting to me. I only read it a couple weeks ago. Apparently, if you give affectionate comments to your partner, it not only lowers their cortisol for the stress response and actually drives down cholesterol and does other good bodily things, but it also is very good for you. So I recommend 5 times a day. Why not? So last but not least, certainly, we're all taught about the golden rule, to treat others as you want to be treated. Actually, it should be the platinum rule. We got to remember that nobody is exactly like you, and you need to understand who they are and treat them the way they want to be treated. So I want to close with this. I'm an optimist. I've actually been called America's last optimist. But I'm also an anthropologist, of course. And for millions of years, we lived in little hunting and gathering societies. And in those hunting and gathering societies, women were just as powerful as men. It's not true that women were always subjugated to men. For millions of years, women commuted to work to gather their vegetables, came home with 60 to 80% of the meal, and the double income family was the rule. We are moving forward to that kind of lifestyle. The biggest trend in our modern world is women piling into the job market in cultures around the world. And as they pile into the job market and create economic equality with men, bad marriages can end and good ones can be made. And as a matter of fact, American demographers are now saying that we're seeing more happy marriages in the United States. I just did a study of 1,000 married people, and I asked the question, would you remarry the person that you have been married to? And 80% said yes, they would. So not only are we seeing what I think is the rise of women in the job market and more stable marriages, we're also living longer, so we got this long middle age with which we can get it right. And sure enough, we got all kinds of technologies, not only internet dating sites for middle-aged people to find the right person, but Viagra, estrogen replacement, hip replacements, all kinds of things to keep the relationship alive. So I will end with this, and I really believe it. If there ever was a time in human evolution when we have the opportunity to make happy marriages, that time is now. Thank you.